His name was Marcus, and for the first 30 years of his life, the world made sure he never forgot that his name meant nothing. He grew up in a small, crowded town where everyone knew each other's business, and nobody hesitated to give their opinion on someone else's life. His father worked at a factory that paid just enough to keep the lights on. His mother did what she could, stretching every meal and every dollar with a kind of quiet dignity that Marcus would only come to appreciate much later in life. They were not a family of complaining, they simply endured. But the world outside the walls of his home was not as patient. From the time Marcus was a young boy, people made assumptions about him. Teachers looked at him and saw a student who would not go far. Neighbors looked at his family's small house and drew their own conclusions. And the other children, as children often do, said out loud what the adults only thought in private. They called him slow. They called him poor. They called him the boy who would never be anything. Marcus was not slow. He was quiet. There is a difference, though the world rarely takes the time to understand it. He sat in the back of classrooms, not because he did not care, but because he had already learned that raising his hand brought nothing but laughter. He kept his eyes down in the hallways not because he was defeated, but because he was watching. He was always watching, studying people, studying patterns, studying the way things worked and the way things failed. Nobody gave him credit for this. Nobody saw it as intelligence. They only saw a boy who did not speak much, and they decided that silence meant emptiness. They were wrong. By the time Marcus finished school, he had collected more rejections than most people receive in a lifetime. He applied for a job at the local bank and was turned away within 5 minutes. He applied to work at a construction company and was told, with a look that carried more words than the man ever spoke out loud, that he did not seem like someone who could handle the responsibility. He sat across from employers who barely looked at his face, who scanned his thin resume and made their decision before he had finished his first sentence. He went home each time without showing what he felt. But at night, in the small room he still shared with his younger brother, he lay in the dark and asked himself the same question over and over. Was everyone right about him? The question tormented him, not because he believed the answer was yes, but because he did not yet have the proof to say with certainty that the answer was no. At 22, something happened that changed the shape of his pain. His uncle, a man who had built a modest business selling agricultural supplies in the nearby region, sat across from Marcus at a dinner table and said something that was meant as a joke, but landed like a blade. "This one," his uncle said to the rest of the family, gesturing at Marcus with a casual wave of his hand, "will spend his whole life waiting for something that will never come." The table laughed. Some laughed harder than others. His mother's smile was uncomfortable. His father looked away. Marcus did not laugh. He looked at his uncle for a long moment, then looked down at his food and said nothing. But inside, something shifted. Something that had been bending under the weight of everyone's opinions finally stopped bending. It became still. Then it became firm. Then it became something that could not be moved. He made a decision that night that he did not announce to anyone. He decided he would never again allow another person's words to determine the direction of his life. He would not argue with the doubters. He would not try to convince anyone of his worth. He would simply work, quietly, consistently, without waiting for applause. The next morning, he woke up 2 hours before dawn. He had noticed something in the town that nobody seemed to pay much attention to. The local farmers, particularly the smaller ones, spent enormous amounts of time and money traveling to the city to purchase supplies that they needed every season. The journey was long, the prices in the city were high, and the entire process ate into both their time and their limited income. Marcus had grown up watching this happen. He had filed it away in the back of his mind, the way he filed everything. Quietly, carefully, without telling anyone. He had saved a small amount of money over the years from various odd jobs. It was not much. Most people would have called it too little to build anything with. But Marcus did not see it that way. He saw it as enough to begin. He rented a tiny storage space on the edge of town. He contacted suppliers directly, cutting out the middlemen that drove up costs. He introduced himself to farmers not as a businessman. He knew they would not take him seriously with that title, but simply as a neighbor who wanted to help them save time and money. He asked them what they needed. He listened more than he spoke, and then he went and got it for them. The first month, he made almost nothing. The second month was not much better. People were skeptical. He was young, unknown, and carried none of the markers that people typically associate with trustworthiness in business. He had no fancy office. He had no long list of credentials. He had only a storage space, a notebook full of careful records, and a commitment to showing up without fail. Word began to move slowly, the way it does in small towns. One farmer told another told a third. The prices Marcus offered were genuine. The reliability he showed was not occasional, it was constant. He never overpromised. He never delivered late if he could help it. And when something went wrong, which it occasionally did, he fixed it without excuses and without drama. By the end of his first year, something quiet had begun to happen. The business was growing. He did not celebrate. He reinvested. Every coin he made went back into expanding what he could offer, building the trust of more farmers, securing better relationships with suppliers. He learned everything he did not know by asking people who did know, by reading everything he could find, and by making mistakes that he treated as the most valuable education available to him. He worked in a way that was not glamorous. Nobody wrote articles about him. Nobody came to film his story. He was simply a young man in a small town, doing work that most people considered beneath them, and doing it better than anyone expected. 3 years passed. Then something remarkable happened. A drought struck the region. Crops suffered. Farmers who had relied on distant city suppliers found themselves unable to get what they needed fast enough, or at prices they could afford. The supply chains that most had depended on broke down under the pressure of the crisis. But Marcus had built something different. He had built relationships. He had built a network that was rooted in trust and maintained by consistency. When the drought hit, he already had the connections, the stock, and the knowledge to serve the farmers around him at a time when nobody else could. He worked around the clock during those months. He slept little. He drove long distances. He negotiated hard on behalf of the farmers who had trusted him, making sure they were not taken advantage of during a vulnerable time. When the drought ended, the farming community around that small town had not forgotten what Marcus did. Business did not just grow after that. It expanded. Requests came from regions he had never served before. Farmers who had never heard of him were now hearing his name from other farmers. Suppliers who had once questioned whether he was worth dealing with were now calling him. He hired his first employee, then his second, then 5 more within the following year. He moved the business out of the tiny storage space and into a proper warehouse. Then a second warehouse. He began supplying not just farmers but cooperatives, and not just in his region but across 2 neighboring provinces. He built systems. He built a team. He built a company that carried his values in its operations: reliability, honesty, and a genuine understanding of the people it served. He was not yet 40 years old. The same town that had watched him leave job interviews empty-handed was now watching something they could not entirely explain. The boy they had laughed at. The quiet one in the back of the classroom, the one his uncle had dismissed at a dinner table, was running one of the most respected agricultural supply businesses in the entire region. He employed over 60 people. His company's name was known across provinces. He had been invited to speak at regional business meetings, which he attended in modest clothes, with the same quiet manner he had always carried. He was not loud about what he had built. He never walked into a room and demanded recognition. He simply walked in, did what needed to be done, and let the results introduce him. People from his past began to appear, as they always do when someone rises. Former classmates who had once mocked him reached out on social media, calling him a brother and a friend. Business people who had once refused to take his calls now sent polite messages requesting meetings. Even his uncle, the man who had called him a joke at that dinner table years ago, visited him at the company office one afternoon and shook his hand with a warmth that he had never shown before. Marcus greeted all of them with the same calmness. He did not hold gatherings to confront them. He did not post public statements reminding the world of what they had said about him. He understood something that most people learn too late. The best reply to those who doubt you is not words. It is a life they cannot argue with. But the thing that defined Marcus more than any achievement was the way he used what he had built. He did not keep his success locked behind walls. He opened his business to young people from the town who reminded him of himself. Quiet, overlooked, underestimated. He created an internship program that specifically sought out young men and women who had no connections, no advantages, no powerful families to call on. He sat with them personally. He taught them not just business, but how to believe in work that nobody else can see yet. He told them, in the simple and direct language that had always been his way, do not wait for someone to tell you that you are capable. That permission will never come from outside. It has to come from the inside. And the only way to find it in there is to start. With whatever you have, wherever you are, right now. He did not become a man who forgot where he came from. His mother still lived in the same house he had grown up in, and he visited her every Sunday without fail. His father, who had spent his whole life in a factory, retired with comfort and dignity because of what his son had built. Marcus never mentioned this publicly. It was not something he needed anyone to know. There were hard moments along the way that he did not broadcast to the world. There were times when the business faced serious difficulties, contracts that fell apart, a bad investment that cost him significantly, a period where he had to make painful decisions about the team he had built. He made those decisions with care and honesty, and he did not run from the consequences of any of them. He was not a perfect man. He would tell you that himself if you asked. He made errors of judgment. He sometimes pushed himself too hard and neglected his own health. He was slow to trust people, a habit formed over years of being let down, and it sometimes created distance where there could have been partnership. He was still learning. He would always be learning. But the measure of a man is not whether he is perfect. The measure of a man is whether he keeps going after everything says stop. And Marcus had kept going through more reasons to stop than most people will ever face. Today, in the province where he grew up, there is a warehouse that carries the name of his company. Outside that warehouse, on most mornings, there is a line of trucks being loaded with supplies that will reach hundreds of farms across the region. Inside, young employees move with purpose through organized aisles, doing work that matters to real people who depend on it. And somewhere in that building, if you look carefully, you will find Marcus. Not in a glass office with his name on the door, not sitting above everyone else behind a large desk. You will find him on the floor, talking to a young employee, asking how something can be done better, listening, always listening. The world called him worthless once. It said it loud and it said it often, and it said it in front of people who were supposed to love him. It said it through closed doors, and turned down interviews, and laughing tables at family dinners. He heard every word, and then he went to work. That is the whole story. That is all there ever is to a life like his. No magic, no luck, no moment where the sky opened and everything became easy. Just a man who decided, in the dark of a small room, in a town that did not believe in him, that he was not finished yet. He was never worthless. He was just early.